Hello everyone. Bring you a video today which is a little bit different in that we're looking at some more 17th century kit. Now, I don't cover this topic very frequently on the channel. I think I've only made one sort of serious video looking at this previously, and that was looking at the kit of a musketeer and the new model army. And what we're looking at here is some newly arrived bits and pieces, sort of expanding that area. And it's an area that has interested me for a very long time, but one where I've not really had any sort of uniform kit, etc. Until relatively recently. And I wanted to get a few more bits and pieces, and we're going to have a look at what's arrived here, not only English Civil War, but 17th century more generally, as you'll see. So without further ado, we'll look at what's arrived. So here we have the bits and pieces which have arrived, which we're going to talk about. On top here we have a helmet, and underneath we have some bandoliers and other bits and pieces to talk about. The helmet I removed from the box it arrived in because the box was rather oversized and wouldn't have fitted in frame, so it would have been a bit pointless including that. I'll move this lot to one side now and start digging out bits and pieces to talk about, and we'll probably talk about the helmet first of all. So I'll bring the helmet back into shot now and we'll have a look at it in a little bit of detail. This is an example of a peaked cabossette. You can see we have the peak at the top here of the shelf. So the shape of this is really designed to deflect blows coming down from a sword slashing downwards from a man on horseback, so protection against cavalry essentially. That's the main aim of having this this sort of shape of the helmet, deflect blows coming downwards, and obviously having the shape as it is coming up to a point means it's very strong. I believe this is made by Derek Cole & Son, but I purchased it from eBay, from a seller on eBay, and got it at about half the regular price you'd see it on listed on the Derek Cole & Son website. So very pleased with that. It doesn't appear to have been used previously. I think this was a listing of several which had been made and then listed on eBay, and this was the final one, and the listing had the price reduced down again, so I decided to pick it up. The construction is quite interesting. You can see here the top of the helmet is formed in one piece. You can see that there, would have been originally, and then the brim is made in two pieces and riveted in place. So essentially it's a three-piece helmet, not including the mounting point for a plume at the back here, which adds a fourth piece to the metalwork of this helmet. It also doesn't include the protectors which come down the side here and form the chin strap. You can see that down here. This one's come untied, but you have these coming down here, leather sections with these scales riveted onto them, the liner in there, and this simply ties off under the chin. So it's somewhat one size fits all in that regard. You do have adjustment for the liner as well. I think in actual use these were often lined with layers of cloth to give some padding inside, and obviously if you did receive a blow, you'd therefore have a good bit of padding between the actual interior of the helmet and the head. It would give a lot of cushioning, whereas this just has a leather sort of suspension inside. You typically see the leather interior riveted in, as we see here, using the same rivets which attach the brim onto the crown of the helmet. But then I think from there you'd generally have a cloth liner to give that padding. So as I say, I'm not entirely sure on that point. The existing examples of originals obviously are not in the best of condition, so it's sometimes difficult to see exactly how the liners functioned. This may well be one example that was used at the time, and certainly a fairly typical design of helmet as would have been seen in the English Civil War. The use of armour definitely dropped off pretty quickly during the course of the English Civil War, the English Civil Wars. So it's more of an early war thing really to see armour in use by pikemen. Musketeers didn't tend to wear armour at all during the English Civil War, but certainly pikemen did early on in some instances. And the use of armour probably did drop off during the course of the war. But I was nevertheless interested to pick up one of these and saw it at a very good price. So that's the helmet which has arrived. Start digging out some of the other bits and pieces to have a look at now. The first is a bandolier. The rest of the items we're going to look at are all from Going Bang, which is a web shop run by, I think, Graham Webb, if I remember correctly. He hand turns the charges for these, makes the leather work and everything. Really good quality reproductions of 17th century bandoliers, not only English Civil War era, but later as well, as we'll see in just a minute or two. And I was very pleased to pick this up. I have one of his bandoliers already, a new model. I had one already, a new model army specification bandolier, basically copied off an example originally in the Tower of London collection, I think now in the Royal Armouries. So from that point of view, a lot of research into existing examples has gone into producing these reproductions, and they are very, very good. This particular example is a typical bandolier of the period, obviously not with the blue charges and so forth, as you'd see on the New Model Army specification bandoliers. Just a general bandolier of the time with the bottles dipped in oil, and I'd say they smell fantastic. The smell when I opened this package was brilliant with two bandoliers in it. We'll see the other one in just a minute. With all of the charges dipped in oil, it means that it smelled rather good when I opened up the parcel. These are made with pewter caps. These are quite interesting. They're made in several pieces and then soldered together, and they're copied from battlefield found examples. Obviously, bandoliers lost in action, the wood and the leather rots away, but the pewter caps are quite commonly found on English Civil War battlefields, which shows they must have been relatively common. So I was keen to pick up an example of one of these, a replica, a reproduction of one of these bandoliers with these pewter caps. And as typical, I've seen on the New Model in the video I made previously looking at New Model Army kit, you have the pouch down here for the musket balls and wadding, and the little primer here. This carries the priming powder. So it's very similar to the rest of the charges, but has a different cap and a stopper there to allow you to prime the pan on the musket with a finer, more finely ground priming powder. Obviously you have this wider section here stitched on where this would sit on the shoulder to spread the load a little bit. Obviously you're carrying quite a lot of weight when these are all full of powder. So a very nice reproduction of a mid-17th century bandolier, and a nice addition from that point of view. The reason for this is sort of for more general English Civil War use, and I'm hoping to get another soldier's coat at some point made up in a more sort of generic colour, though obviously different regiments in theory would be outfitted by their colonels with matching soldiers' coats, so it's a little bit difficult to be generic when you're trying to represent a specific regiment, but I'll get something in maybe a brown or a grey or something of that nature, and these would be typical bandoliers of this sort of pattern, would be typical of the period. And obviously the New Model example I have is quite specific to New Model Army, so it's nice to have something that's a bit more generic with this bandolier here. I also purchased a second bandolier from Going Bang, and this is a little bit different, as you will see. We have a wider belt first of all, a different design of pouch down at the bottom here. The construction is also somewhat different, and the shape of the charges is different as well, the powder boxes. And this is a late 17th century bandolier, so suitable for the Restoration period, 1660s onwards, until bandoliers fell out of use in the the very late 17th, early 18th century. And from that point of view, again, a useful thing to have. I'm interested in the English Army, the Restoration, and that's sort of where I've gone back to as a starting point of my interest in the development of the British Army, is back to the New Model and the Army of the Restoration. And I'm hoping to get a soldier's coat made up from that sort of era, and maybe put a set of equipment together for that era, perhaps the Tangier Garrison, and that's sort of what I'm aiming for with this. And so I wanted to order one of these as part of the order to fulfill part of the equipment for that sort of set of uniform and equipment. And it's arrived, and it's really, really nicely made. This isn't specifically a review of the kit I'm receiving here, but I can say Going Bang is superb if you're interested in the 17th century era kit. Definitely a place to go for bandoliers and some of the other bits and pieces he makes as well. And we'll see that in just a moment. We'll take this out of the way. The final thing I purchased, final thing which has arrived, is again from Going Bang. Just dig this out of the parcel here, and it is a sling. Now, slings were not typically used with muskets during the English Civil War. However, it's known that dragoons did use them to some degree. It certainly appears so. There are, I think, engravings showing muskets slung across the back of dragoons, which means they must have had something to sling them with, and this is an example of what was very probably used. The loop is simply slung over the front of the musket, so this sits over, the muzzle would go through here, and it would sit over the barrel of the musket, and then the rear here has a leather cord which ties through the front of the pistol grip to secure that end, so it would sit under the barrel like that. This is made in several pieces, which makes good sense, using up shorter sections of leather rather than one long section. So it's a very early example of a musket sling, and for that specific purpose of a dragoon carrying the musket whilst on horseback, while not actually using it. Generally speaking, the musket would just be carried over the shoulder when on the march by foot soldiers, but on horseback you really need a way of carrying it where you can have both hands free to use the reins, and this is one option of doing that. There are also examples, I think, of later dragoons using buckets to carry the butts of their muskets. But certainly there are engravings from around the English Civil War era that show muskets slung across the back of dragoons. So a sling is the obvious way that was done. And again, this is from Going Bang, one of the other parts of the sort of English Civil War era 17th century kit he makes is these musket slings. So I was keen to pick up one of those as well. And that's everything that's arrived. So there it is. Quite a bit of that from Going Bang, as I say, and then the helmet we looked at the start as well. So I hope you found it interesting looking at this. A bit of a pace change, a bit of a change of scene really from what we've been looking at recently on the channel, particularly looking at a lot of Gulf War kit, obviously late 20th century, as opposed to anything as early as this or even getting close. So hopefully it's not been too jarring, and hopefully it has been of interest looking at these bits and pieces. If you have found it interesting and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you've hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you'd like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as I always say, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It really is greatly appreciated. As I always say, thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address in the description as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.